Let's think back to 6 months ago. I know that seems like a lifetime ago. 6 months ago, New Year's Eve was approaching, and I'm sure many of you felt, as I did then, sort of filled with anticipation about the new year. I was particularly excited because I knew that my second grandchild would be born in 2020 and that we would complete our wonderful, amazing new building. Well, now both of those things have happened, and they are just really off the charts wonderful. But a lot has happened so far in 2020. A lot of other things have happened that none of us saw coming. A global pandemic, living in lockdown, hundreds of thousands of lives lost, an economy imploding and plummeting, millions of people losing their jobs, lives and plans and events disrupted, and it's not over yet. And then came the horrific murder of George Floyd and the mass protests across our country, and indeed in other countries as well. And a new day of reckoning for white America and for white Americans. And then on top of all of that, our country seems to be more divided than ever. That in many cases, families are being split and friendships are strained over everything from who to vote for to whether to wear a face mask. So let's just acknowledge for a moment that this is a lot. This is a lot. Say it with me. This is a lot. And I know I'm not the only one who feels like on any given day I'm on an emotional roller coaster. And so today I'd like us to pause for just a few moments to appreciate the weight of what we are all carrying and give ourselves a little love, to give ourselves the gift of self-compassion. Well, self-compassion is not the same as self-pity. It doesn't mean that we feel sorry for ourselves. It doesn't mean that we wallow in our troubles. Rather, self-compassion means that we acknowledge that we're going through a hard time and we're hurting, and we love ourselves through it. Self-compassion really simply means being your own best friend. Unfortunately, more often, we're our own worst enemies. So I'd like you to imagine for a moment if you're pushing a grocery cart down the store aisle and you come upon a parent who's yelling at their child, yelling things like, "I told you not to do that. How can you be so stupid? You make my life so hard. You're never going to amount to anything." Whew. Well, you would be horrified, right? You would be horrified to hear a parent talking to their child that way, and you might even be tempted to say something like, "Hey, he's up there. They're doing the best that they can." You know, we cringe when we hear a parent talk to their child that way. But how often do we say similar things to ourselves? Consciously or unconsciously, how often do we tell ourselves that we're weak or stupid or incompetent or ugly, unlovable, or not good enough? How often do we talk to ourselves in just that way, or even fault ourselves for the way we're feeling? I shouldn't be so angry. Now, why am I so sad? And they call this shoulding on yourself. I shouldn't feel the way I'm feeling. I shouldn't be so sensitive. I shouldn't be so loud. I shouldn't be so stubborn or defensive or domineering or whatever it is. And here's a good one. I should be more spiritual. Yeah. You see, we're our own worst critics. And some people think that's a good thing, that we have to be hard on ourselves in order to stay motivated to get better. People think that if we're kind to ourselves, that we'll become weak or lazy, when exactly the opposite is true. You see that when we are indulging in self-criticism, it actually undermines our motivation. Haven't you ever felt this way? If you're feeling bad about yourself, but you have a goal you've set, you feel like, why bother? I'm no good anyway, right? So this idea of being hard on ourselves, it actually weakens our resolve because it weakens our sense of self-worth. And then we don't feel like continuing on. We don't believe in ourselves to continue growing. And not only that, but when we are so self-critical, think about what we're doing inside of our bodies. Because we're both the attacker and the attacked, right? So we got all this adrenaline pouring into our physical selves, and it gets our reptilian brain in charge, and then we go into fight or flight mode. And then before you know it, we're not only criticizing ourselves, but we're criticizing other people as well. Well, fortunately, as mammals and as human beings, we have another system available to us that we can tap into. And this is a system that is predisposed to love and care. You see, our bodies are programmed to respond to warmth and kindness. It's an intrinsic part of our human nature that we respond to love and warmth and kindness and soft tones. Kristen Neff, who's the author of the book Selfcompassion, says this: when we are safe and comforted, we are in the optimal mindset to do our best. Yes, not when we're criticizing ourselves, but when we're loving ourselves. We are in the optimal mindset to do our best. And our best is exactly what is needed right now. And you know, honestly, if self-compassion is what brings us our best, then by all means, let's embrace it. You know, we are living through such a pivotal time right now, painful and difficult to be sure, but also so ripe with opportunity. Consider how all of these challenges before us, whether it's around health or truth or racial equality or oneness or caring about others, being compassionate, whether it's about unity, all of these challenges that are before us can be a catalyst to a new awakening. They can actually be that stimulus to help us rise in consciousness. But only if we have the resilience and the resolve to keep going, even when the going gets tough, to believe in ourselves, to acknowledge our mistakes and to learn from them without hating or condemning ourselves. You see the difference? It's like when we've talked before about loving people who have different ideas or even loving thine enemy, and we say, learn to separate the deed from the doer. You can hate the deed, but don't hate the doer. Well, the same in terms of loving ourselves, to learn to separate out. Oh, I don't like that I did that. I don't like that I've thought that way. I don't like that I've been that way, or whatever it might be. But separate that from who you truly are. You see, make that your training ground for doing better in the future. Well, 3 weeks ago in my Sunday talk, I made several errors that caused me a great deal of angst. The first one was that I shared with everyone that my granddaughter, Maya Isabel, was born on May 25th. She wasn't born on May 25th. She was born on May 24th. Ugh, right? And then a little later, I described my son-in-law as being African American. He's not African American. He's Haitian American. And that led to me learning that to refer to Black people as African Americans really isn't as inclusive as it should be, because it doesn't encompass all these different heritages. So I thought about all this, and you know what? I just felt really terrible. I felt like, man, I really messed up. And frustrated, because I thought, I'm trying so hard to get this right, to share what's in my heart, to get my language right and my thinking right. And for a little while there, I was really kind of wallowing in those bad feelings. But then I realized, if I keep on with this self-criticism, I'm going to get stuck. And I don't want to be stuck. I want to keep learning. I want to keep growing. I want to keep discovering those things that I haven't been aware of so that I can be a better person. I want to learn more about race, about anti-racism, about things I haven't realized around equality or racial injustice. Whatever it may be, I want to keep going. And that requires, and it isn't just me, this is for any of us doing hard work, whether it's on this topic or any other, that we can say to ourselves, man, I really messed it up that time, didn't I? I'll get it right next time. I'll get it right next time. You see, our untouched goodness is still here, our essential goodness. And so we love ourselves through it. We love ourselves through our missteps. You know, when we do that, we're really loving ourselves, as we would say, as God loves us, or as God is, right? Remembering that we are spiritual beings having a human experience. That human experience isn't perfect, that we make mistakes, and the mistakes are how we learn, we veer off where we want to be, and so on. But we can always correct our course. The important thing is to keep going. So how do we learn this wonderful spiritual practice of self-compassion? Well, here's an idea that I really love. And this one comes from Curtis Jones. You all remember Curtis Jones, I think, right? Everybody here remembers Curtis Jones. So he's done a couple of really fabulous workshops here at Unity Renaissance. And he's a life coach and a counselor. And you may recall that a lot of his wisdom was sort of hard-won, that Curtis went through a very depleting and severe 9-year depression. And he said that there was one particular practice that made a huge difference for him in bringing himself out of that. He said that he decided to try a very simple experiment. For 24 hours, he would not judge himself. He was just going to go 24 hours without getting on his own case, without, listening to that inner dialogue about his perceived flaws or shortcomings. And he said that when he started that 24-hour period, he just began observing his own thoughts, right? He would observe when self-judgment was starting to arise. He would pay attention to what he'd been thinking that had brought that about. And then he would say, "Not today. Not today. I'm just not going there." He didn't deny it. He didn't repress it. He just didn't indulge it. And Curtis said this: if I was putting myself down, worrying about what people think of me, or worrying about the past or the future, I would just say, I'm not going to pay attention to it. For now, I'm going to give myself a little grace. Isn't that lovely? For now, I'm going to give myself a little grace. Well, after he completed the 24-hour challenge, he felt so good that he decided to do it the next day, and the next, and the next, and the next, and he continues it to this day. I think it's decades later. And now Curtis says that practice made such a difference. He said, the first day of my experiment, the don't judge yourself experiment, the first day of that experiment was the last day of my depression. That's something. It makes you realize what the power of our self-talk. Well, the story doesn't end there, because something absolutely wonderful has happened recently. There's a young man in England, and he heard about Curtis, and he heard about his work and his books and his coaching, etc. And he decided he was going to try the 24-hour Don't Judge Yourself challenge. And he too had amazing results. And this is a young man who has also suffered from depression. He said, wow, he just felt so much better the next day, that not only did he want to continue it, but he started a Facebook group for the Don't Judge Yourself challenge to encourage other people to try it. And you can go on and you can check it out and ask to be a part of that group, see what's going on there. He's got a great video interview with Curtis. But you don't even have to do that. In fact, you don't have to do anything. But I would just encourage you to consider trying this. Try to go 24 hours without judging yourself and see what you learn. I've been working it some in these past couple of days, not as focused as I would like, so that's yet to come. But every time I do that, every time I feel a judgment coming up and I choose to let it go, I feel lighter, I feel happier, I feel freer. I actually feel empowered to continue on in my own growth. You see, when we learn to not judge ourselves, we can then learn to not judge others. Curtis said that his next experiment was to try to go 7 days without judging other people. He was in the military, and he said what he told himself is, rather than judging them, I'm going to look for something good about them and tell them. And within a couple of days, people were kind of flooding to him, like, why are you so positive? I mean, they basically wanted what he was having. Such a simple thing. You see, when we're open-hearted towards ourselves, it allows us to be open-hearted to other people, and isn't that what is needed so much right now? That's exactly what Jesus meant when he said, love thy neighbor as thyself. Love yourself. Love yourself first, deeply. Love yourself through your hard times. Love yourself through your mistakes. And then go and love your neighbor that way as well. You see, we can learn to stop our habit of negative self-talk. We can learn the art of self-compassion. We can learn to be our own best friend. As the Buddha says, you yourself, as much as anybody in the entire universe, deserve your love and affection. Our work is about remembering that everyone makes mistakes, that the key is to learn from them and keep going. So treat yourself with compassion. This is a tough time. This is a lot. Love yourself through it so that together we can rise into a new consciousness and make this a more just, humane, and loving world. Let's turn now to our meditation. I invite you to close your eyes, get comfortable in your seat. Release and let go. Feeling yourself supported by your chair, by Mother Earth, by the universe. Not only physically supported, but supported in your spiritual journey. I invite you in this moment to allow yourself to feel compassion for your own beautiful gift of a self. Breathe into your heart. Breathe into how far you've come in your own life and the bright promise of what's ahead. I invite you to send love throughout every cell of your being. Imagine it lighting up with the love that you are, with the love of Spirit. Feeling a wave of calm and reassurance wash over you. Know that you're okay. Even with mistakes you've made, with missteps, you're okay. And you're still growing and going. I invite you to just allow these few moments of self-nurturing and self-love in a time of silence. That we can give ourselves this gift of self-comforting and self-compassion at any time. And when we do, we are reminded of how strong and powerful and resilient and filled with resolve we are. We go forward into whatever challenge is before us in the world or within ourselves with great courage, with bravery, with knowing that all is well and all will be well. And for this truth and for the joy and the privilege of sharing our journey, we are grateful. Thank you, God. Thank you, God. So it is. Amen.